Hello everyone, Tony Bulmer from the Bulmer Group. Great to be with you again. I've had a lot of requests to do a video as a follow-up to my webinar last week on virtual comms. I'm going to do a very short, sharp video just reinforcing the key takeaways that I talked about last week to ensure that your virtual communications are as impactful and as engaging as they can be. I have to say at the start, virtual comms are proving to be very effective. Apart from efficient and time-saving, travelling, etc., they really are very personable. And I think, in fact, phone calls going forward are going to be, in many cases, replaced by video conferencing with all the devices we've got available. Technology is not always perfect, but it is still a very intimate and effective and personable way of communicating. But like anything, if it's done well. And I just want to share with you 8 thoughts that can help you very simply and immediately make a difference to your virtual comms. So let me walk you through those thoughts. The first one I talk about all the time, and that's structural clarity, and it's relevant in face-to-face meetings, but it's even more relevant on virtual. What does it mean? It means planning, really planning. Firstly, 3 or 4 key topics you want to discuss in the conversation or presentation that you're having with people, one or many. So in other words, determining an agenda. An example simply might be current workload, future projects and resourcing. So to be very clear on the 3 issues you want to discuss. To predetermine the message or what I call mini conclusion to each of those sections, particularly if it's a discussion you're leading. In some cases, if it's a completely open forum discussion, it might be that those mini conclusions need to evolve in the actual conversation itself. But if you're running that meeting, it's your job to help us know when we've arrived at those mini conclusions. So the first thing is to plan your structure. Secondly, to convey it in delivery. And a lot of people think that if I have structure, it's going to be more formal than I might like. It doesn't need to be formal at all because it's all about language. So it's unlikely you're going to want to say, my agenda this morning is, but you can say, look, the way I'd like to break this discussion down, or the 3 issues I'd like to explore in this conversation today. You can say it in the most wonderfully conversational way. To help people, particularly if it's a lengthy discussion, know where they are in relation to that structure at any point. So referring back to agenda headings. So take the first chunk, for example, the current workload. You might a couple of times refer back to it as a heading. So folks, look, a couple of other things in terms of our current workload. And you're not adding formality, you're adding clarity. You're just letting people know where we are in relation to each of these chunks. And then the third piece in delivering structure is to really extract out the mini conclusions. So at the end of a section, to be able to pause, to use what I call warning words, or my analogy's often been amber lights, to say something like, so look, in terms of current workload, I think the really simple point I would make, I think what we're all agreeing on here is, and it's a big amber light to say, hey, give me your attention, here comes a key point. Of course, you can say that differently. You can say it leaning forward, leaning back. You can vary voice, animation, etc. But it just needs to be really clearly verbally extracted. And the key to that mini conclusion is to make it 3 words, 4 words, not 23 words. So structure is crucial to have powerful and digestible conversations. Plan it and then deliver it, albeit very informally, but deliver it overtly in the discussion. That's the first point. The second point, most of these are now shorter. The second point is around visuals. Visuals still play a role. They play very definitely a role, but don't let the slides dominate, so don't have too many. I was working on a presentation with a client the other day. They had 20 odd slides for a 20-minute presentation, really, and we paired them back to about 6. Otherwise, you become a voiceover to a document. Don't do that. That won't be very engaging. Don't have too many, mix them up, words, graphs, charts, etc., pictures, but keep them interesting. And the third point around visuals is to be aware of verbally pointing. So what I mean by that is, if you do go to full screen, which you should do, I think at times with the slides, to actually be very clear in saying, look, you'll see there on the right-hand side of the graph, or you'll see down the bottom on the left in the red. Be very explicit with verbally directing your audience so they don't have to work and they're not lagging behind you. But don't stay on full screen with the slide too long. Bring it back to you, much more engaging. A different issue, third point, is around the backgrounds that we may entertain. And I've been talking about this a bit lately. I think we're in a very different world at the moment. We're obviously working from home. And home is home. It's not a corporate environment. It's not our office. It just is our home. And it's interesting because particularly with external audiences, clients, for example, coming to our offices, they no longer get to see foyers, reception areas, get a sense of the vibe of the business, the culture of the business. That's all out of play. And so reflecting your brand, and really very much your personal brand, is a function of the environment you're in at home. And so while some people have been inclined to think we should neutralize our backgrounds and make them very corporate and what have you, I would say make them be what you want them to be. And if a mountain bike is in the background because that's what you do every second morning or every morning, then so be it. If there's artwork on the wall that is of interest to you, then so be it. You'll find that these things will often start conversations, which is a good thing because there's engagement. And it's also giving a sense of who you are. Now, linking to that is also perhaps how we might dress in this home office environment. And again, a bit's been written about this lately. I saw the expression loungewear for the first time the other day. I think a lot of people, some people feel that they would rather dress up in a work environment or work clothing to feel like they are going to work, and that's their prerogative. But it may look out of sync with the environment you're in, and that may look a bit awkward, as opposed to dressing in a way that's comfortable, clean, tidy, obviously, but in sync with the environment. And what that should do is send a very strong sense of calm to your audience, that you're in quite total control, really, with the world that we're in at the moment. And I think that's a very positive message in itself. So think about your brand and think about the environment and your own personal appearance as to what you want to convey. But don't neutralize everything. Now, fourth point, engagement. How do you engage in a virtual world? Now, it is harder. Three things: content, delivery, and logistics. What I'd say about content is mix it up. Now, all I mean by that is don't just have facts and figures. Have examples, have stories. We all know stories illustrate, they add clarity, but they're much more interesting to listen to. They engage people. So keep having anecdotes, analogies, case studies, any examples that you can build in over and above facts and figures. From a delivery point of view, there are a number of things, a number of little things that if you do each of these, you will sustain engagement. You will achieve engagement, you will sustain it. One is check in more often. By that, and all of this is relevant to face-to-face meetings, but even more so virtually. So check in, say less, check in with your listeners, your audience, as to whether they're with you, whether they have any questions, whether anything needs clarifying. When they ask questions, acknowledge the worth of the questions where relevant, and only say if you genuinely mean it. Reference back to their questions. Use their names when doing so. Fred, you made an interesting point earlier. You raised a very interesting question earlier. People's names are a great trigger for engagement. Wonderful engagement, and a wonderful trigger. Maybe ask them a question. Rather than you doing all the talking, you could ask them a question to see what thoughts or contribution they have to the conversation. Also in delivery, I want you to think about your introductions. Think about, in the world we're in at the moment, where compassion is very relevant, just being human is so much more crucial than ever. A check-in start with, how's everyone going? What did they do last night for dinner? What did they have for dinner last night? How is their family coping with them working from home? Just more personal, intimate communication. It might be 60, 90 seconds, but it's very useful communication to engage people. The last point about your delivery is bring your personality with you. And what I mean by that is I've always used the term fun spikes. Even in serious conversations, don't be afraid to throw in the odd facetious human remark that just puts a smile on people's faces. They have to enjoy having this meeting, this discussion with you to stay engaged, even though it might be quite a serious business conversation. So there's some tips in terms of your delivery for engagement. Lastly, logistically around engagement, I would say to you, think about things like Getting rid of other devices, phones, iPads, clear them from their meeting environments so that people aren't being distracted by messages and meetings. I also say be on time and run to time. So those three areas combined, content, delivery, and logistics, will very much help with the engagement in your meetings. Conveying energy, fifth point. The key to that is movement. And so what that means is to give yourself space. I'm sitting on a slightly elevated chair here. I've got a bit of space between the camera and myself, and it allows me to move. I can even stand up if I want to. A lot of people sit right on top of their laptop, and it really blocks them. It traps them. So stay animated to the degree that you normally are. What you'll also find with movement is it actually really helps your voice projection and modulation. The more trapped you are, the more monotone you will likely to become throughout the discussion. 6th point, staying on track. How do you keep people on track? It's a bit harder virtually. So a couple of things. You might consider, I mentioned having agendas earlier, you might consider sending those out prior to the meeting just to say, hey, tomorrow morning, that's what we're going to discuss. Everyone comfortable with that? It just lets people be in that zone as to what the key discussion points are. On the day, if people are perhaps going off track, it's very easy and appropriate for you to say, look, again, Fred, that's a great point, but let's park that. Let's talk about that next week. In the interest of time, I want to keep this down to an hour this morning, and it's probably not. That is okay. That is your job as a facilitator. 7th point, leadership and authority. People ask me, how do I convey that? And really, that's an opportunity to summarize everything I've just said to you. Be clear in your mind. So what that requires is to plan the conversation and plan your messaging prior. It might take you 15 minutes to sit down and do it. It's not hard to do. Be emphatic in delivery. Be clear and help extract, isolate, not the perfect word at the moment, but isolate key points so everyone is clear. That clarity of mind is a wonderful example of leadership. Show energy, have presence, make sure you give yourself space. And I would say be honest more than anything else at the moment. Be honest. I've said this in a number of videos. Have conviction over what you do know to be the case, what strategies are in place, where the business is heading, but be comfortable saying what you don't yet know. There is a lot of uncertainty in the world that we're in at the moment, business or otherwise, and it is okay to acknowledge that. My final point, the question is, will you know your meetings are working well? Will you know that they're all hitting the mark with your people, your clients? And the answer is probably you won't. You might, but you may not be sure. Ask. We are in new territory. Don't feel like you have to be seen to be getting it right first time. Be very comfortable sending a note the next day. Hey guys, was that meeting effective? Did you like the way we ran that meeting? Are you comfortable with the levels of interaction or not? Seek feedback. They'll tell you, they'll appreciate you asking, and you'll learn as you go. So, there's some tips. Put those into place. Your virtual meetings can be very effective, they can be fun, and you actually, I think in this process, can be an excellent communicator, and that's crucial. Thanks for your time.